the Everything But Politics podcast.
Welcome back, friends, to this 120th edition of the Everything But Politics podcast. Now, today's guest knows ball. I know a lot of you think you know ball. This guy actually knows ball, both on and off the field. It's my honor to be welcoming my friend, Andy Hecht, to the show. Andy, welcome.
Welcome.
Appreciate you guys having me. Excited to be here and tell some behind-the-scenes stories that people would never know, would never imagine, but that's what you learn from being with the NFL for 22 years.
No doubt. Before we get into the NFL, tell us about your CFP experience last night at the Orange Bowl. How was that great game between Notre Dame and Penn State?
What a game.
Unbelievable. You know, it's interesting, and it just, first of all, it's in Miami, Florida, right? And it felt like it was about 40 degrees, even though it was in the mid-50s, which was just an experience in itself. But the game was incredible. You know, the first half was low scoring, and then all of a sudden the points came out in the second half. You know, a lot of the bettors were excited on the under and the over hit, but it was the quarterback play that really concerned me, especially on the Penn State side, you know, and in that second half with the decision making. And that combined with just even Riley Leonard's body of work, it's amazing with these big programs how you lack that star quarterback play. And then the play calling, of course. You know, Notre Dame couldn't run the football against Penn State's defense. Meanwhile, Penn State, you know, they just couldn't find openings down the field, and nobody would take chances down the field. And with these big programs, that's something that definitely is important, especially when it comes to these bowl games at a high level and, you know, for certain of these athletes taking their game to the next level.
No doubt. And a quick thing I saw this morning. Penn State receivers did not have a single completion. I don't know if you knew
Correct.
that. I don't know how you win a game without your receivers catching not a single ball, right? That just seems insane.
It's unbelievable, you know, and it's just something that, once again, like being around the league as long as I have, and even in the college game, you know, there's certain things that not only the average fan sees, but certain things that I'll always see with schemes, with analytics, and then this decision making, which is just, it just blows my mind. Like you're seeing these reads, and you're seeing these guys wide open running quick slants, and there just was a lack of vision on Penn State's side in finding these open targets. And it was throughout the whole game. And everything started slow for both sides offensively, but then it was just like the points were scored, and it was execution at the end, which obviously led to Notre Dame's win.
So what do you think's going to happen tonight? Ohio State, Texas?
I'll tell you what, I really like Texas. You know,
Same.
My thing is that Ryan Day's program, you know, it's hot, it's cold. And, you know, although they came out and played the way they've played lately, you know, I always look back to that Michigan game, and I always look back to lack of consistency. Whereas Texas, to me, is just more of explosive when it comes down to the offensive side of the ball. I think they're better coached by Sarkisian. I just think that they're a better program. And I think that Texas will show their true colors tonight and prevail.
And I think it's worth noting. I mean, so we're recording Friday the 10th. This is going to be out Monday. But Texas is 6-point dogs, and the game is in Arlington, right? That also isn't adding up. And it also goes to show how skewed the seedings were, right? Why is the 3 seed, I think Ohio State's 6. Why is the 3 seed getting 6 points essentially at home?
Yeah, it's interesting. And, you know, a lot of it that happens, as you know, in the sports betting world, which is also huge, especially when it comes to college football and the NFL, is the line movement, right? And especially establishing a certain line so Vegas and the odds makers have both sides covered. So I would expect to see that line move a little bit today, although, once again, they're looking at where the bets are coming in or anticipating based on what happened last week, where the bets are going to come in. And at that point, making sure they're covered on both sides so it's not, you know, a bath that Vegas takes, so to speak.
Andy, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Where did this love of football come from?
So I grew up in New York City. I was a Giants fan growing up. Interestingly enough, my gym teacher in elementary school, his name was Doug Parcells.
Wow.
His brother was the infamous Bill Parcells. So I got to meet Bill Parcells when I was like 8 years old, and that was a childhood dream. And I grew up, you know, watching the Giants and watching Lawrence Taylor and those greats play, and Phil Simms at quarterback, Joe Morris at running back, Phil McConkey, whose kid now is, you know, in the NFL for the Chargers. And I had a love for the game right off the bat. Mark Bavaro was the tight end. So I was able to watch greats back in the day. And, it was interesting because it was more, and you realize this now, it was more for the love of the game back then than what's become a business today, right? With salaries,
Interesting.
with franchising, all that stuff. None of that was around. So really back then it was the passion of the game. And then I started playing. And I played, in middle school and high school, and I'm 5'5" and 170 pounds, this undersized guy, but I played with heart. And I was a running back and outside linebacker, and moved to Michigan when I was 12 and ended up being all state. Played in the Pontiac Silverdome in high
Nice.
school, and it was a terrific experience. And just for me, it was all heart and all determination and all focus, and that led me to really having a passion for the game between watching it, playing it, and then just defying odds, and ended up going to Syracuse because I was recruited Division II and Division III, and I was like, okay, let's do the next best thing and be around the game, because I figured at that point the pro career wasn't happening. With that said, that's where I got with the NFL and had that body of work after that.
So after graduating from Syracuse, what was we have a lot of 20, 30 somethings that listen to our show, right? And what the career path you pursued is highly, highly competitive. For anyone listening that's at that post grad phase in their life, what's the first step they should take in trying to pursue a career in professional sports?
It's great that you said that, because I'm going to give you Syracuse as an example. So I attended the Newhouse School at Syracuse University, which is the number one school when it comes to communications, when it comes to who the grads are, right? The graduates there are Bob Costas, Marv Albert, Dick Stockton, Mike Tirico, Ted Koppel, just to name a few. The greats have gone there. And for me, it was interesting because people felt at my age, and I remember this in college, that if I had Syracuse and the Newhouse School on my resume, I'd be the next anchor on SportsCenter. Unfortunately, those people are no longer in the business or never met it in the business, period. It's all about the internships, it's all about the connections, it's all about who you know. And you have to go for what you want. You got to break down doors, you got to connect, you got to talk to people, and you follow your passion. And that's what I did. I was interning 60 hours a week during college, whether it was during the school year, whether it was going home when I lived in Michigan at the time for breaks. And I interned with the Detroit Lions on all my breaks off with Barry Sanders and Johnny Morton and Herman Moore. And what I would do is I was like a sponge, and I just listened, I digested, I took notes, and then I came up with my own way of creative thinking on how I could contribute to, at least from a thought standpoint, you name it, whether it's monetizing content,
Mhm.
whether it's how to create content. And that's how I got into the NFL. So it's all about the internships, it's all about relationships, and it's all about breaking down doors. For all the no's you get, don't get discouraged, because there is a yes in there. As long as you have that
Totally.
heart and that passion.
Yep.
Totally. So I want to push back just a touch, Andy. Here in 2025, right? My resume, Evan's resume, they're not overly polished, right? To get an internship with the Lions, the Bears, the Giants. But with this platform we've created, getting the opportunity to chat with men like you, Joe Buck, Jason Zone Fisher, people that are in this world, I would say that in 2025, you don't maybe there's an alternative route, right? Rather than when you were coming up, you maybe didn't have the same opportunities that you do now. As long as all you need is an iPhone and social media, and you could, the sky's the limit.
Correct. And it's interesting you say that. I'm going to give you an example. So I had a dinner Monday night in Fort Lauderdale. A guy who I just met had asked me, hey, is there any way you can meet my son? Just talk to him about the business and see what's out there, and kind of get a gauge on his body of work. He's a kid that goes to the University of Wisconsin. No problem. Because for me, it's all about giving back at this point. And I know the journey I went through, the trials and tribulations of, as you mentioned, how to get in the right hands, how to talk to the right person. And really, that's where things started. So for me, I sat down with the dad, I sat down with the kid, I listened to him, and I made a phone call in 2 minutes. And I called the guy who I hired at CBS Sports, which was the end of my NFL career. And I said, hey, this guy's going to be in Stamford, Connecticut, which are where CBS Sports studios are, in addition to New York. He's going to be there Saturday. Are you there? He's like, yep, I'll be there. I said, great. I'm going to have the kid come in at 4 o'clock. You'll meet him. Do me a favor. Just let him shadow, let him watch what you guys do, and just get him in the door. And for me, and that's what it is always being able to give back. Because where I come in is, whether it's a team, whether it's NFL Network, whether it's CBS Sports, if I feel like you have the passion, if I feel like you have the focus, if you have the fire, if you have the desire, if you want to win, I'll get your resume in the right hands. And that's what's important. There's enough of us out there have been through the process, understand the process, understand what it takes to make it in this business. And then it comes down to helping others. And that's where the most important thing to me is giving back.
Love it.
I love that, Andy. Now I want to talk about the first role you got in the NFL. What team was that for, and what was your specific position for that team?
So it's interesting. So I'm going to tell you a story. So I was with the Detroit Lions in 97.
Okay.
I graduated college May 11th from Syracuse University. I started working May 12th. This is how it went down. So I was interning for the Lions over the summers, just kept connecting, getting my foot in the door, doing what I needed to do.
Mhm.
At that point, I would talk to them and just, keep the conversations going. Excuse me, and make sure that we had our dialogue going. So an opportunity opened up and it said 5 to 7 years experience. Obviously, I didn't have that experience, but I also wasn't discouraged. I'm like, okay, I'm going to give it a shot. There was a summer where I had come back to intern right before I graduated, and the producer of the Lions television network had quit. Something had happened, something had gone down. I don't know the details, but he just walked out. I said to the guy that ran the content division ahead of him, I said, let me produce the show today. He looked at me, I looked at him. I said, look, you don't have to pay me, just give me a shot. There's a fine line between being confident and being cocky. Although I was nervous, I knew it was an opportunity for me to seize. I ended up producing the show that night. Everything went great because, once again, I was interning. I was a sponge. I learned. I took notes. And I knew I had what it takes to at least put my best foot forward, do the best I can. If it didn't work out, it didn't work out, but I'm going to take that chance. Ended up being great. Show went great. So let me take you back to the 5 to 7 years experience. There were about 700 candidates. They ended up interviewing 10. I was one of 10 to get interviewed. The interview process went down to 5. When it got to 5, the gentleman's name was Keith Allo, and I remember him telling me, hey, man, we really appreciate you doing this. It's going to be tough. You got a lot of competition, but we're going to give you a shot to be part of this interview process. So I figured out in all my studies of what they were looking for, and obviously everything's revenue, right? And how do you monetize content? How do you bring the non-sports audience into sports? How do we humanize the players, right? Everybody sees what these guys do on the field. What do they do off the field? How do we take them behind the scenes? Remember, this is all before Hard Knocks, Access, all that.
Yep.
So I figured out a way because I would always talk to these guys, Herman Moore, Johnny Morton, Barry Sanders. I created my own tape while I was an intern of taking these guys places, taking them to Dave and Buster's, taking them to classic car shows. I just filmed it through a camera that I had just to at least show POV perspective of humanizing these players. So when I got to the final stages of the interview, I always held on to this, and I showed Keith, who was the guy who was hiring. I said, hey, this is just some of what I've done. And he was blown away by it. So long story short, he goes, hey, kid, when do you graduate? And I said, May 11th. He goes, I'll see you May 12th. Congratulations. And that's how I got my first job.
Wow.
That's special.
So you went from Syracuse, and then you got your first job literally the day after graduation. How did from May 11th to May 12th, and then so on throughout that summer, how did your life change?
It was unbelievable. I just remember coming home, and this was my full focus. It was surreal. I had to pinch myself because here I am, and it's 1997. I'm 22 years old, and I'm living through a dream. My family had this plan for me. I was going to go to law school, be a lawyer. Everybody in my family is a lawyer, and I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. I have a passion for this. I did high school radio. We had a high school radio station, and I would never tell people who I wanted to interview, just like you guys have been terrific with guests that you get. I was 16 years old, and I would call up and just get through PR people and get to the source. I had Harry Carey on. I had Bill Parcells on. I had Sean Kemp on at the age of 16 because I never told them we were a high school radio station. If I ever told them that, they'd laugh at me, and I just spoke with confidence. I said, hey, we're a sports talk radio station in Detroit. Really, we're in the suburbs of Bloomfield Hills. Really, we were 360 watts, but nobody needed to know that. And I ended up getting these high-profile guests and built a tape off that too. So for me, it was always creating access. But my whole life changed when I was given this opportunity in Detroit, and I took it and ran with it. And I was that one guy who was part of the front office at a very young age that had relationships with the ownership group, with the Ford group, with Bobby Ross, who was the head coach, with all the coaching staff. and then with the players. And it enabled me to, like I said, just really be part of the process where I would get cool with the players. I would always talk to them when I didn't need anything, and I would live their lifestyle. So I was able to connect with them and at the same time get that access and get that content that nobody could get that took me over the top.
And
Nice. Fuck
after
yeah.
the Lions, was that when you joined the Philadelphia Eagles?
That's correct. So it was interesting. So Joe Banner, who was the CEO of the Eagles, who went on to become the CEO of the Browns and very high profile guy, contacted me when I was in Detroit. Somehow he got wind of the content that I was building in Detroit, which once again was this all access. We were monetizing content. I was getting these guys endorsement deals. Like, for example, the running back at the time was James Stewart. So I would say James Stewart goes 0 to 60 in 4.6 seconds. And we would do a split screen and connect with Ford, for example, or Chrysler, whoever it was. The Chrysler 300 goes 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds. And we were getting these guys endorsement deals and everything. So Joe Banner got wind of it. And Joe Banner's an analytics guy. He's like this nerdy, very sophisticated, tough to talk to, all business dude. And I'm 25 at the time. And I figured out also, because I wasn't paid much in Detroit, I was making 40,000, but it was an opportunity. I'm like, I need an agent because now people are coming after me for what I do. So they flew me out to Philadelphia. I sit down with Joe Banner. It's just me and him in a room. He goes, "Kid." Now all these people are calling me kid, whether it was, my hiring in Detroit or in Philly, and I'm 25. He goes, "What is this?" That's how the conversation started, because he got a hold of the material I was doing, the tape, and I said, "Look, I'm showing people who these players are off the field, what they stand for, what their interests are, what their goals are, which is leading to monetizing content. And most importantly, how do we get the non-sports audience involved in following these organizations?" And he absolutely loved it. And I said, "Oh, by the way, the quarterback, Donovan McNabb, I went to college with him. So in college, I used to throw all the parties for the athletes. I used to be on the radio station out there. So Donovan and I were already cool. So he walked over to Donovan in the locker room, and Donovan said, "Yeah, you got to bring this guy in, man. I remember him. He was like the life of Syracuse. He's got a big personality, knows everybody, this, that, the other." So long story short, I get hired in Philadelphia, and I have a great Philadelphia story to tell you. Two of them, as a matter of fact. And I'm going to start with this one. There was a running back named Deuce Staley. So Deuce Staley left to go back to South Carolina during the season, like started this whole holdout. And this was new because remember, now you have all these guys, they get franchised or they don't get tagged or they don't get the contract they want, or, the Le'Veon Bell situation, they just walk out. They go, "I'm not playing," right? "I want to be traded." Like the insubordination, but that wasn't around back then. So this was a rare case. And Deuce just left the team and flew down to South Carolina, where he went to college, and he's working out, and he's working out with the football team there and just doing his thing and just waiting for, an opportunity. And nobody was calling him from the Eagles. And it was bizarre because this was something that back then nobody would experience and nobody would see. So I said, "Fly me down there. I'll get Deuce to talk." Went right to Joe Banner's office, and I went to Andy Reid at the time. And Andy Reid's like, "I can't even reach him." And I said to him, "Coach, please, that's all I ask. Just give me the opportunity. Fly me down there. I guarantee I'll get him to break his silence. I'll find out what's going on." Now, remember, I'm 26 at the time. This is 2001, but I'm a very confident guy. I also am putting a lot on the line here because if I don't get him to talk, there's a problem. But I was texting him during this time, so I knew I would get him to open up a little bit. And I knew how to get in the mindset of these guys because you have to befriend them and you have to earn their trust to have a conversation with them. So I go down there and I say, "Hey, Deuce, I'm in Columbia, South Carolina." And he goes, "What?" I said, "Yeah, I'm down here. Just let's meet up for lunch." So we met up. I talked to him. I said, "Hey, would you be okay? I think it's important that the nation hears your side of the story." And meanwhile, ESPN, all these networks are trying to get down there to get Deuce Staley to talk. So it's important, but I think you talk to me about this because rather than an interview, it's going to be a conversation. I know how to portray you. I know your story, and I'm on your side. So I got a camera crew down there, contracted out. I got him to talk, interviewed him, and then we're working out on the football field, and they're filming us, me and Deuce Staley doing football drills in South Carolina. So the interview goes great. Tells his whole side of the story, how he wants to be back. He's a heart to be an Eagle. He just feels like he's been disrespected, mistreated, etc. I knew he wasn't getting any more money, but he just, these guys have egos. He just wanted to tell his story. So, long story short, I get this content. It's gold, like gold. I got the video, I got the audio, I got everything. He's telling his story, lays it all out. 20 minutes, me and Deuce. So, I get a call from ESPN because now everybody starts hearing that Deuce Staley spoke. So, here I am, this kid, 26 years old. I'm the lead story on ESPN Sports Center. Chris Berman tossing to me to introduce my conversation with Deuce Staley. And then a week later, Deuce Staley's back with the Eagles organization. So this is where things really took off. Then the next Eagles story I'm just going to share with you is, as I'm sure you remember, is when Terrell Owens was sent home from training camp. This is when training camp was in Lehigh. The sit-ups in the driveway, I'm sure, big story. Choppers are over his house in New Jersey. And there I am again with Terrell Owens because I was able to befriend Terrell Owens. I did all his charity events in the offseason. He was with the Eagles for 1 year, but me and him connected. I used to get exclusive interviews with him and got him in Jersey there. He had his birthday party the next week. Nobody was coming in. I was allowed in with cameras. I got Entertainment Tonight calling me, Kevin Frazier. Hey, and I knew Kevin Frazier because he used to be in the sports business. Hey, do you think you can get us in? I'll fly in from LA because at the time, Tio was dating Gabrielle Union. It's a big entertainment thing. I get him in. So for me, it was all about relationships, connecting, and that's what led me to the opportunity after the Eagles, which was the NFL Network.
Wait, so what? While with the Eagles, what was your official title there?
I was the vice president of programming. So what I did was I basically was in charge of all the content for the organization, the radio partners, the TV partners. How do we monetize content? I was in the sales meetings because the salespeople are like, okay, we have this client, we have this client, we have this client. I would know how to parallel one client with another based on what their vision was. But once again, I created access before access. I'm dropping mics in the locker room, in the team rooms, in the meeting rooms. I'm sitting in the film rooms with John Harbaugh, who's the special teams coach, coaching up guys. We're just like a fly on the wall experience. I'm in the quarterback room with McNabb and just, it's this access before, once again, Hard Knocks and all this stuff was ever available. And people were just throwing money at the organization, all these sponsors to try to sponsor this content.
So cool.
So you go to the NFL Network, and what was your role with them?
So I'm going to tell you the story how I got hired there. So there was a guy named Eric Weinberger, who's the executive producer. And I remember my agent sent my resume reel over, and I got a phone call because it was West Coast time. I see a 310 number. It's 11:30 at night on the East Coast. So it's 8:30 on the West Coast. And he goes, Andy Hecht. I'm like, yeah. He goes, Eric Weinberger, NFL Network. Okay, how you doing? He goes, what is this? I said, what's what? He goes, this stuff on your tape, I don't understand. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, you're inside meeting rooms and team rooms and people's birthday parties with these high profile athletes. How do you do this? I said, well, I form relationships and I get cool with these people. I earn their trust. And then we go from there. He goes, all right, what's it going to take to get you to LA? So I said, I'll have my agent call you. His agent calls. The next week, they fly me out. I get the job, and I'm there for, they put me in like furnished housing for like 3 months. I move across the country and literally had 2 days to get started. And he goes, I want you to be the jack of all trades. He goes, I'm going to travel you all over to all the teams. I want whatever this access thing is. I want you to get with the high profile guys. I want you to be in the film rooms, meeting rooms, team rooms, and then think how we develop a program that's unique to us. I said, okay. So that's where I sat down, brainstormed. I went to college with Scott Hansen. Scott Hansen had just got hired. And through the network, we created NFL Red Zone.
Wow. You were like the
Wow.
first content creator before there ever was a definition of content creating.
Yeah, I was that kid that like was kind of like hip to the game. I was Jewish, but they called me the Hebrew. I had my soul card activated. And these players loved me because, I worked out. I liked hip hop. So I was like one of them. So they just saw me as like a guy who they respected. And then I took that and ran with it.
So what was the inception of the of Red Zone, right? Were you in that room when that idea came about?
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I knew, at that point, people have a short time span of lifespan, I should say, when it comes to like attention. It's even worse now. But even back then, you have someone's attention for 30 seconds. And I knew that, okay, this is generation ADD. It's also all about scoring. It's all about people like to see points. That's why soccer never got big in the United States. These 1-1 games or 2-1 games, nobody wants to see that. They want
Boring.
action, right? Exactly. They want action. They want points. They want hits. So I remember we're in the room there. I'm like, well, how do we develop something where all we do is show touchdowns, turnovers, scoring, the plays that matter? And that's how we figured out, because I was a guy who was a producer at the time. And for me, I'm a visionary. So I could see 12 different monitors. And I remember we would like tap into all these different training camps. So I'd have a monitor and we'd go live. And the host at the time was Andrew Siciliano, who I went to college with as well. And I remember saying to Andrew one day, hey, listen, just ride out with me. We don't need a rundown. Like, everybody was very structured with a rundown. I was the one producer. I didn't need a rundown because I was a communicator. So I said, let's just go on the fly with these things. I'll let you know when the action's coming, what's happening. I'll give you a 10-second synopsis, and then let's go with it. So we're just going monitor to monitor to monitor. Let's take you to the Chargers. Let's take you to the Eagles. Let's take you to the Buffalo Bills. And we're going inside training camps, right and left. And I took that concept and said, why don't we do this with scoring? And we're in a meeting, and they came up with the name Red Zone, and that's how Red Zone got created.
So prior to that, I mean, so my football knowledge probably only goes a little over a decade, right? I know some football history, but prior to this, was the term red zone common use within 20 yards of the end zone, or you guys kind of created it?
It was used, but not the way it's used now. So
like the Bears are in the red zone, like that.
Right.
That was not a thing.
No, not so much. It was just, in scoring range, or, about to score. The terminology wasn't as much, very here and there, very here and there. So we just took the concept and ran with it, and, people loved it. And then it became this, paid commodity as well, that people would pay for to see, just like seeing all the games. Like, people, and then fantasy started to evolve, and it took off running because everybody wanted to see scoring. They wanted to see the action. They didn't need, what was inside the sandwich. They want to know, okay, I'm ready to eat. All right, here's your sandwich, right? So that's it.
Well, another thing that's so perfect about it is that NFL is really the only sport in America where you watch regardless of if your team is playing or not. So to have all of this stimulation, all this action, all the hits, all the touchdown, it really is such a perfect blend for the consumer.
100%. And I ended up staying at the NFL Network for 7 years, and it's interesting, and just to kind of spin things forward and creating. I used to produce Game Day Final, Game Day Morning, Red Zone, Total Access, did all the shows. Work with Rich Eisen, work with the guys, Rod Woodson, Deion Sanders, Marshall Falk, Warren Sapp, who I still keep in touch with to this day. And once again, those are also guys that I was able to form relationships with. So I text back and forth with Deion today, yesterday, the other day. Same thing with Sapp. Sapp was like a different dude, like bipolar to the fullest, like just wouldn't deal with you, wouldn't talk to you. And I just knew with each personality how to get in with them based on who they were and what we needed as an organization. So I was always that guy, no matter how difficult the ask, to figure out how to get in with somebody, to connect with somebody. And, that's where it came full circle, because I did this all at the NFL Network. And then Joe Banner got hired in Cleveland. So in 2013, Joe Banner got hired, calls me up, and I'm working with Michael Lombardi at the time, who Michael Lombardi is now going to be the GM and basically the CEO of North Carolina with Bill Belichick. Was always a Belichick guy and a Joe Banner guy, but then we hired him at NFL Network. So Joe Banner gets hired, brings in myself and Michael Lombardi to go to Cleveland. And I'm like, wow, moving from LA to Cleveland. But just like a player, you look at opportunity. And I just knew at that point, like, Cleveland was a 4-12 football team. But, it's that blue collar, like the Steelers, the Browns. Mm-hmm. They bleed football in those cities. I'm like, okay, let's give it a shot. And basically, Joe Banner knew my body of work. So he's like, let's create this masterpiece that you've done everywhere you've been. I'm like, okay. So I get to Cleveland. First guy we draft, 2013, is Trent Richardson, 3rd overall. And they wanted me to get with him, get him acclimated, this, that, the other. So we did the all access, everything else. Had him in the film room with the running back coach Wilbur Montgomery. Picked him at the airport, private plane. We were on the plane with him, filming all access, etc. Well, needless to say, Trent Richardson was a bust. Couldn't find a hole because playing for the University of Alabama, there were holes right, left, sideways. That's the problem is that a lot of these guys that play, and you guys have seen this too as fans of the game,
Yep.
a lot of these guys that excel at the college level, it's so different in the pros because every pro athlete is a college all-pro, right? So it doesn't matter if the team's good or not good, the schemes, the playbooks, everything is so different. And you don't have these powerhouses, right? You look at guys who failed in the league, like a Trent Richardson, or remember how successful Matt Leinart was at USC, and he failed because these programs are so loaded that there's a lack of balance. And they play half their season is against teams they beat 72-0 and 65-3. Rarely, if any time, does that happen in the NFL, no matter who you're playing.
And it's so interesting to make that point. So I would say in modern football being the last decade, right? A lot of these stud pro quarterbacks that dominate the game today, they did not come from these powerhouses like you mentioned. You got Pat Mahomes, Texas Tech, Josh Allen, Wyoming, Lamar Jackson, Louisville. Joe Burrow's an exception, but a lot of these guys came from schools where they really had to fight. They didn't have the best players in the world. They had to be exceptional to win these games, and I feel like that's translated to the next level for many of these elite quarterbacks.
Absolutely right. And then the other problem in the NFL, and I'm going to get to this because this is going to be a good transition for us as we stay in Cleveland, is the lack of watching film. Okay, and that's a
that
major.
Sounds familiar, huh?
Yes, and it's a major problem for all you sports fans and Netflix fans. I'm going to take you behind the scenes for the real story. So nobody change the channel or turn this off at this point because this is gold right here. Okay,
Let's do it.
this is the real deal Johnny Manziel story. Okay, Netflix had about half of it correct. I'm just going to give you a little more depth and context to it. So after Trent Richardson's there, the next year we have 2 first-round picks. What people don't realize is there was a guy taken 9th overall named Justin Gilbert, who was a defensive back out of Pittsburgh. And needless to say, he's no longer in the league either, and he lasted for 2 seasons. Okay? Mm-hmm. Later in the first round, as I'm sitting in the draft room with Jimmy Haslam, the head coach at the time was Mike Pettin, and the GM was Ray Farmer. We're sitting in the draft room and, quarterbacks coming off the board. Of course, Johnny Manziel is still there. And all of a sudden, I hear Jimmy say, we're trading up. Okay, interesting. And I knew we needed a quarterback, okay, because the quarterback at the time, we had Brandon Weeden the year before, who also was a first-round pick, disaster. And we had Brian Hoyer on the roster. Yep. And Brian Hoyer's, call it what you want. He's a Belichick disciple. But, really a game manager time. Never is going to show you anything. Smart guy, good film watcher, but not a lot of talent.
Elite
so
backup.
So I knew we needed a quarterback at the time. So I was there during all the private workouts. So we had Teddy Bridgewater in that year. We had Derek Carr in that year. And we had Manziel in that year. And I remember that the GM Ray Farmer was sold on Teddy Bridgewater. The head coach Mike Pettin loved Derek Carr. And everybody wrote off Johnny Manziel. They were concerned about, going through the combine, everything else, not the talent level, the maturity level, right? And how he's going to grasp the game. So I remember Jimmy Haslam trades up. Now, there are still certain quarterbacks on the board here. So we're kind of like really not thinking Manziel. 2 minutes, 3 minutes go by. Everybody's quiet in the draft room. Jimmy's on the phone. You can't really hear him because he's in the corner. This is before Mike Pettin's making the call because Jimmy's doing some due diligence too. I remember he hangs up the phone and he goes, guys, we're going to try it. We're going to do this. We're taking Johnny Manziel. The room got quiet because I knew our head coach, Mike Pettin well. I knew Ray well. I knew neither of these guys wanted any part of Johnny Manziel. And Kyle Shanahan was the offense coordinator at the time, and I knew he wanted no part of Johnny. Needless to say, the room gets quiet. Goodell makes the announcement. And here we are, and Johnny Manziel coming to Cleveland. So we are there all night because what's happening is Johnny's flying in the next day. So the head of PR, his name is Peter John Baptiste, who was with New York. It's this big meeting. We're there till 4 a.m. because it's how to announce this. How do we get all the media coverage? How do we have everybody there? Because we know it's going to be a shit show. We know it's going to be crazy. We know it's like the next calling. And meanwhile, they sign him. Nike signs Johnny Manziel. So these billboards are being painted as soon as we made the announcement all over Cleveland. LeBron James and Johnny Manziel on the same billboard. Imagine that.
How about
right?
that?
Two different calibers, two different athletes, all over the city of Cleveland. Cleveland's buzzing, going crazy. Money Manziel is coming to town. The city's going nuts.
Manziel.
So we put him on a private plane. I meet him at the airport. It's Johnny and Justin Gilbert's on the flight too, although nobody cares about that because everything's Johnny, Johnny, Johnny. Johnny gets there, says all the right things. He's a new changed man, mature, this, that, the other. So I remember a couple days after that, Brian Hoyer is in the practice facility, and I'm standing with Brian because we're just shooting the shit, talking. And Johnny walks in, says hey to me, whatever. And Brian goes, okay, so today from 2 to 4, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to look at some other things, and we're going to watch film because I want to show you certain schematics. Johnny goes, I'm not really good with film. It's not my thing. Brian goes, well, this is the NFL. We watch film. He goes, yeah, I'm not really about that. I'll be good. I'll just follow your lead otherwise, but I watch film on my own. So nobody says anything. So I'm going to spin you forward a little bit. We start the season off. We're 7-4. Brian Hoyer's the quarterback. 7-4. But Brian had a rough game against the Atlanta Falcons, which was the last win. We were 6-4, gets us to 7-4. We won with defense. We won with running the football. So there was a meeting the next day that I was in actually because I'm able to film certain things behind the scenes and then see what we want to use, what we don't want to use. So they're in a meeting, and Jimmy Haslam walks in, and it's Coach Penn and Kyle Shanahan, myself, Ray Farmer, the GM, and Jimmy Haslam walks in. He goes, guys, I know what you're talking about here, the quarterback situation, because I want to give Johnny a shot. Kyle gets quiet. Kyle goes, 30 seconds later, Jimmy, we're 7-4 football team. I'm not willing to make that change. Jimmy goes, you're making the change. We're going to start Johnny. Now, there was a method to the madness behind this because Johnny's first start was coming Thursday Night Football, NFL Network, at Cincinnati, national TV, national platform. Jimmy was a businessman in every aspect, right? So we got the attention we needed at training camp. We're getting all sorts of like sales deals in, exclusive content that I was doing with Johnny. And here we are today, getting ready for Thursday Night Football. We make the announcement on a Monday. Johnny's starting this Thursday. Brian Hoyer's in shock. Johnny's ready to go, talking, saying all the right things. So leading up to the game, doesn't watch football, film, none of that. Just practice, practice, practice. Thursday arrives. It's the environment in the jungle in Cincinnati is electric. I mean, you talk about all the national media being there, local media, writers. You got writers coming from overseas. It's insane. And I'm like, this is like I'm working, a Super Bowl here because I went to 14 Super Bowls, and I'm like, this is insane. So, needless to say, we start off slow. Johnny's in the pocket, running for his life, running right, running left, because remember, he didn't watch film. He's really just trying to follow the playbook. Kyle's calling all the plays, but Johnny's running for his life because he's not following schemes. He's not following audible calls. He really couldn't read defenses. Ray Maluga sacked him 3 times. He's doing the money dance on Johnny. We lose the game 33-0.
Jeez.
Team meeting the next day. Johnny, they get in his ass. He's kind of listening, doing whatever. Season goes, we lose 5 in a row. We end up 7-9, don't make the playoffs. The next season, Johnny's named starter. And we get to the bye week. When we get to the bye week, we're a 3-5 football team. And Kyle's still there, and the same coaching staff is still there. And I remember the bye week came up, and Johnny was interviewed. He goes, yep, I'm going. And he showed some signs of obviously being better, but still not to where he needs to be, nowhere near that. And still wasn't watching film. And Kyle was beyond frustrated. Kyle was ready to quit at this point already. We had talked several talks. He and I were close. So we're 3-5, and he's like, yep, I'm going to stay here for the bye week. No vacation plans, nothing. I'm going to work hard. I know I got a lot of work to do. I know I'm not where I need to be, but rest assured I will be. Everybody listens. Thursday of the bye week, this video comes out on social media. There's like pool parties, Austin, Texas, blown up ducks, women, drinks, like you name it. Like it's going down, bottles and models in Austin, Texas. And Johnny's all over it. And it's posted by this famous DJ in Austin, Texas. So Johnny comes back from the bye week. Coach Pettin calls him in his office. He goes, Johnny, what's all this video that's come to my attention? Because, Mike Pettin was never on social media, but people brought his attention. He goes, Coach, you got to understand that's last year. There's people in Austin, Texas that never liked me. They're trying to frame me. This video is a year old. Well, there were a couple players on the team, and one of the guys, he was a linebacker named Chris Kirksey. So nobody liked Johnny Manziel. None of the players respected him, liked him, anything. So Chris Kirksey walks into Mike Pettin's office and says, Coach, I need to come clean with you on something. Coach goes, hey, what's going on? And he's like, well, that video that Johnny told you was from a year ago because Coach brought it up in a team meeting. The song in the background is by a rapper called Future, and it's called March Madness. That song came out 2 months ago. That's how Johnny was caught. They let Johnny finish out the season. Johnny was cut. Kyle Shanahan quit before they were able to fire the coaching staff. And that's the Johnny Manziel story and his body of work.
In your 20 plus years being around the league, is there any story similar to Johnny Manziel?
Never. Nothing like that. Because you've always had like guys get in trouble. You've had guys, DUIs or something happen with women. The only other story I was a part of, and it was sad that I got to see unfold, was while I was at NFL Network, was the Darren Sharper story. And I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. Darren's now in jail for 20 years. And it's an interesting story, and I'm going to tell it real quick just because it's a good learning experience for people, that think that athletes are role models, or just like anybody, you run into problems. And it's a very interesting story because, and I'll tell you why. So I knew Darren really well. Darren worked with us at NFL Network. Darren came from a middle-class family. Darren dated Gabrielle Union, and very social guy.
Has everyone dated Gabrielle Union?
It's unbelievable. I mean, she's definitely been around the block. So, now, she's with Dwayne Wade, but before that, she was in the NFL, I guess.
Okay.
So anyway, it was interesting because with Darren Sharper, I just remember because Reggie Bush knew him well, and, he played in New Orleans and played with the Packers and played with the Vikings. And I just remember with Darren, like, we would work out together in Beverly Hills, and he would always be like saying to me, like, and you guys get it, you go to the gym, he's like, he'd see some woman, he goes, hey, do you know her? Can you talk to her for me? And I was just like blown away. I'm like, dude, why don't you go talk to her? You're a good looking dude. You play in the NFL. But he was socially awkward with women. And the crazy part was that nobody had any idea what was going on. I remember we were at the NFL Network and we got a phone call. And actually one of our producers picked it up, and it was the FBI. And we thought it was a prank call. And they go, this is John so-and-so badge number, blah, 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 from the FBI. Is Darren Sharper coming to work today? And Darren, remember, didn't live in L.A., so he'd stay in the hotel. So he stayed in a hotel called the Century Plaza Hotel, which is on Avenue of the Stars in Century City, right by Beverly Hills. So the guy answered and said, yep, we have our talent meeting at noon. And the guy from the FBI goes, I would suggest that you just call him now and just tell him don't come in today. We didn't know what was going on. So we went to the head of the network, and he said, he had made a phone call. We couldn't get details. Remember, this is legal. Mm-hmm. So we made the phone call, told him not to come in. Later that day at about 1:00, news breaks. Darren is arrested at the Century Plaza Hotel, and nobody knows why. Story comes out a couple of days later that 11 women in 4 states have the same story, that they woke up the next morning naked, don't know what happened, and Darren was on top of them. 11 women, 4 states. So this trial goes on. Darren's obviously suspended from the NFL Network during this time. And needless to say, he went to the courts. He was found guilty, took a plea deal, and they gave him 10 years in prison. And this just, was astonishing everybody because everybody knew Darren is a good guy, but obviously things happen. The federal judge threw out the 10 years and gave him 20, the maximum sentence, throughout the plea deal. So Darren's now serving 20 years. So, it's interesting because to me, that was something that was eye-opening to me when you ask about what I've been around, because that just goes to show you that some of these athletes, with women nowadays and what they're subject to, and even with the fantasy world and the gambling world, like God forbid, and a quarterback throws a pick at the end and you lose, your house, you lose hundreds of thousands of dollars based on a play. Like, they're in very vulnerable situations. But this was where Darren put somebody and other people in vulnerable situations. But it was very eye opening because it brought out what life is really like, the trials and tribulations, some being the fault of the athlete, some being something that they're subject to. But to be around something like that was very eye opening to me. And I remember we would always go on trips with the NFL, whether it was team trips or, I was at 14 Super Bowls. And I remember we'd be in meetings with, Roger Goodell and heads of the league and security, and be like, remember, this is a business trip. Remember, this is a business trip, and we would always remember that. Warren Sapp, who I work with at NFL Network, and this is public knowledge, he was arrested twice, 2 different Super Bowls, with a prostitute the night before the game, and Sunday morning, when he's supposed to be on game day morning, he was nowhere to be found. How they let him, after the first time, come back and for suspension was beyond me, but never got a job again. So I was always somebody that, I had a great run and a great career and have no regrets, but I was always a guy that always had my eyes open. And that's why I matured quickly from the age of 22 to now, just being around certain stories, whether they were positive, negative, in between, and taking that as learning experiences for my life.
For sure. I'm 24, Evan's 23, right? And we've been lucky to be around some pretty cool people, have some cool people on our show, meet in real life. Obviously, you have too, being around all these unbelievable organizations, meeting legendary players. For anyone listening, when you get kids, right? They look up so much to these athletes that are really just like 26, 27, like they're just kids. They're kids too. With people listening, what advice do you tell them on like not over admiring some of these men?
Yeah, the biggest thing I would tell people, and I was able to experience in a young age of 22, because here I am and working for a team, and I'm like, wow, these guys, like, we're landing in these cities, and there's women waiting in the lobby, and there's all sorts of things going on, and we're at the club and we're at lounges. Is always stay true to how you were raised, your core values, who you are, your integrity, because these athletes, what happens is, in a lot of cases, they didn't grow up the same way we did. Not to say we're privileged, but they grew up in very, very different environments, and the environment never left them. And then they come from being poor, going through poverty, to getting millions of dollars. And that's where they can't control the outcome. And then they're around the wrong people. So the way you were raised and what you've learned in your life to lead up to that age is always stay true to the values, the beliefs, and who you are individually, to not get caught up in a situation that's not a reflection on who you are.
And I would imagine oftentimes, right, at 24, 25, 26, you learn your lesson the hard way and you finally get it and it's too late. Your opportunity's over.
Exactly right. And I've seen it so many times, like something as simple as guys who even work behind the scenes for teams, right? And I've seen it right and left, which is like, and I'll give you an example. A guy, let's say the 3 of us are out just hanging out, and you get a DUI. In the NFL, if I got a DUI, I lose my job, because everything you do, and when you work for an organization, you represent the team. And that's why I was always very careful. I always had my own car. Yeah, I'd be out with the players, but I would always be conscious of my surroundings, be aware of my surroundings. And it's very important because, in today's day and age, you have to be grounded. You have to know that this lifestyle, although you do it for a business, this is not how you live. This is not who you are. And some of the guys get it. When I was with the Eagles, guys like Brian Dawkins, I'm sure you remember, was a Hall of Famer.
Legend.
He would get to the hotel. His free time, he's a married man, between 7 and 9 o'clock, he stayed in his room, or he went to get something to eat. He's not out Tuesday nights partying. And then you see guys like Henry Ruggs, who you remember was a first-round pick
what a shame.
in Vegas, and was driving 145 miles per hour, and the situation happened, killed somebody. And what people don't realize is everybody's like, well, I don't understand how this happened, or, I don't understand, he made a mistake. What people don't realize is that happened at 3:15 in the morning on a Tuesday, and they practice 3 hours later Wednesday morning. So why is he out? So it's all about making sure you're not putting yourself in vulnerable situations. And that's a big life advice, whether you do this for a living or you don't, is just know your surroundings, be aware, and be smart about your decisions.
Andy, since we were little kids, literally for as long as I can remember, my dad would always say to my brothers and I, accidents happen by accident.
I love that, and it's so true because once again, you see a lot of situations, like for example, the Sean Taylor situation. I'm sure you remember that. That was a robbery planned out by two kids. The other two kids were along for the ride, had no idea what was going on. One guy's just driving, but statutes state that everybody's involved in the murder then at that point, and people's lives are ruined based upon decision making. Not the guy that pulled the trigger, not the guy that decided to rob Sean Taylor, but it's peer pressure, right? Like the three of us go out, one of us makes a decision, three of us are liable for that decision. And that's where you really have to be smart about things. So to your point, accidents happen based on vulnerability, based on lack of awareness in a lot of cases, and that leads to a life-changing experience.
Totally. Yeah, I want to make a quick pivot towards you've been around a few really legendary organizations. And I want to talk about culture, right? So much of culture starts at the top with ownership. As Bears fans, we arguably have the worst ownership in all of football. With that said, right, it goes down a tier. So the Bears, there's a great LinkedIn post that I saw. I'll send you, Andy. You could read it. But it's about how the Bears ownership, right, ran by the McCaskey family. They went down, hired a first-time general manager in Ryan Poles, right? And then from there, you hire a first-time head coach in Matt Eberflus. How do you, like, if this was any organization, first, if this was a publicly traded company, you would short them. You want experience at the top. You go from the McCaskey family to a first-time GM, no experience, to a first-time head coach. How are you not going to get a GM with prior experience to then guide that head coach and give him some of the insights and knowledge he's gained over the years? So when you see stuff like that, is it like as obvious to you as it is to me?
It sure is. And I can tell you in Cleveland, just as that situation alone, the culture was terrible. And the reason it was coaches are getting fired every year. Nobody's given a fair shot. The talent's not there. The mistakes were made in the draft. The mistakes were made in free agency. You guys know the track record. You've had 20 different starting quarterbacks in 14 seasons. Like, it's insane. And decisions are being made by a guy that is a businessman rather than a guy that understands the game, a guy that thinks he has the Jerry Jones juice without the Jerry Jones knowledge. And that's Jimmy Haslam. And Jimmy Haslam's, dad owned Pilot Flying J, which was $100 million company. Jimmy Haslam's brother was the governor of Tennessee. So when you come from an affluent family like that and you're given keys to the kingdom, and then these decisions are being made, it is a trickle-down effect. And when you see people not being given an opportunity to do their job, the hands-on from the ownership group that's way too hands-on, like, it ruins culture. And culture is so important. Whereas Philadelphia, when I was there from 2000 2006, we won 5 NFC championships. Jeff Lurie was the owner, and Jeff Lurie let everybody do their job, whether it was Joe Banner, whether it was Andy Reid, whether it was Andy Reid building out his coaching staff. And that's what's important to build culture. And you see that now with certain organizations. And I keep in touch with these organizations. Detroit now with Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell, by the Fords, has been given the opportunity to build a culture. And he's one of the guys. Mike Tomlin in Pittsburgh. These guys are motivators, great coaches, but they know how to relate to the players. It's not a dictatorship. And that's what builds culture. Pete Carroll had it in Seattle with his teams.
Yep.
There's that fire. And, Dan Quinn and the new ownership group in Washington, they built a totally new culture from what happened with Dan Snyder and all the lawsuits and everything that happens. And trust me, when that stuff comes out, it is a trickle-down effect throughout the organization. When you lose the buy-in, when you lose the respect, the culture goes away.
Well, and you're dealing with, like we said, these 20, 30-somethings that have so much fucking money. They have the world at their fingertips. You need a true alpha male leading these young men to the promised land being the Super Bowl.
Correct. And you see that, and that's why, these guys, if you talk to anybody that has played for a Mike Tomlin, an Andy Reid, a Dan Campbell, I talked to Amaron St. Brown, they will tell you firsthand, it all comes down to respect. And if they respect the coach, there's a different level of play they're going to get. Because remember, it's one thing to be a business, it's one thing to buy in. And if you bought in, and if you're bought in today, tomorrow, and the next day, the team eventually will win. And you know what? They're still bought in, in teams like the Rams where they lost a lot of talent. Sean McVay, they love that guy, right? Les Snead, the GM, they love that guy. Like, everything is about, like Harbaugh coming in. Look what's happened with the Chargers. They don't really have a lot of talent, right? But look at the way they're playing. John Harbaugh in Baltimore and what he's done. And you hear these guys speak about their players, about Lamar. You see Dan Campbell's passion when we talk about access, the locker room speeches. But that's genuine. It's not for the cameras. That's when you have a culture that you want to continue to build.
So, Andy, before we let you go, can you tell us about what you're doing now with Business Exit Advisors?
Absolutely. So what I do now is I partnered up with a guy I went to college with named Josh Sagman, and I run our franchise division. So what I do is I take concepts where I feel are ready to grow, ready to take that next step, low overhead, cash flow positive, and we grow their business from 1 to 3 units to 5 to 10 units, and we continue to build from there. Where Josh and I are great, and I've used this through the NFL, is contacts, right, and networking, and I still have that. So certain businesses, I'm talking to guys like Anquan Bolden, who lives in Delray, Florida, who I still keep in touch with, Mark Ingram, because these guys I've identified as future businessmen that are well-spoken, that know how to control the narrative, that can be investors. I still talk to, guys like Marshall Falk. Marshall Falk runs wealth investment firms now. He owns Popeyes franchises. William McGinnis owns Buffalo Wing Houses. Jamal Mashburn owns Outback Steakhouse franchises. So I talk to these guys and get their input on their success stories as well. But I utilize those contacts to also help legitimize the business through guys who are capable of running a business.
That's awesome. Yeah. How long have you been working with that?
6 months now. So we're a new company, and we work with Damon John as well from Shark Tank because Damon believes in us, and Damon's a guy that, like we talked about, it's networking, it's opening doors. And then once those doors are open, just like, what I try to give back with people, your age and even younger, to get them in this business, is opening the door. Then it's on you to bring the passion, bring that fire, and execute.
And I don't know so this is episode 120. Of all the guests we've had, I don't know if anyone has built quite the network you have from their college days. Sounds like those 4 years were incredibly valuable to you and your network.
Absolutely. And, that's where you really shine. It's like you never know who you're talking to and where you are, right? So what I do is I always have conversations with people. I'm very open, very honest, very transparent. And I think the big thing is just, my biggest advice is talk to everyone, because everybody becomes a learning experience for you. However it impacts you, however that conversation directs you, every single conversation that everybody you meet adds value to decision-making in your life. And once again, by not having that conversation, you never know what path you could have taken at that particular time.
Love it. Andy, I know you're on LinkedIn. Where else are some great places for people to find you, reach you, keep up with you and what you're doing?
Facebook, for sure. Facebook's a big thing. I built a business off Facebook. I used to own a supplement line while I was working for the NFL. My business partner, honestly, was Heath Evans, who played in the NFL, and Mike O'Hearn, who was Titan from American Gladiators. And we built a great business, sold it. So Facebook, LinkedIn, and, I'm always here to help, and I'm always here to give back. Always here to have that conversation and empower people to be great based upon what I went through in life, where I am now, and what it takes to get to the top.
Fuck yeah. Andy, this has been a quick hour, right? You know it's a great episode when it goes by fast. That's kind of the bottom line.
And you know what? When it's a conversation and not an interview, and we're telling stories to each other and we're picking each other's brains, and it's authentic, it's organic, that's how it was a great episode.
Last question. Absolutely. One word answer. Who's winning the Super Bowl?
Lions.
There we go.
Let's go. Thank you guys for tuning in. Appreciate you very much. And we will see you next Monday. God bless.